Beyond Survival is the official podcast of Waymaker Institute. Our desire is to equip you as a follower of Jesus to thrive. Each episode reveals how the gospel impacts the entire human experience for the advancement of God's kingdom. Ultimately, Jesus' promise of abundant life means we are meant to go beyond survival. So, let's jump in with today's episode.
Hey, the Beyond Survival podcast. We are in the midst of a kind of a new series where we're talking about regular rhythms. And by regular rhythms, we mean these ideas of maybe spiritual disciplines or spiritual rhythms that we build into our lives. And we're talking about the idea that these rhythms produce something in us. They create something in us. To some extent, the rhythms almost inform who we become as individuals. I think maybe who we become is a combination of who we hang out with plus our rhythms, right? You put those together and you can kind of forecast who you become. So the Beyond Survival is the official podcast of Waymaker Institute.
Official.
Are you for Waymaker Institute?
I am for Waymaker Institute.
I love it.
I may have attended a class or two.
I like it.
I don't know. So.
And I wanted to encourage people that if these episodes, if this podcast was helpful and impactful, which part of me is like, well, I mean, even for us, Sophie, you and I had talked about the fact that like we sit here and we do these and then we re-listen to them and it impacts us like it's the first time.
Yeah.
And so if that is you, if you have said, man, this was powerful, this was a powerful truth, I know someone that needs this, we would just love for you to share it, honestly, and to let people know about it so that we could get people's wisdom, their testimonies, what God's teaching them out to help people go beyond survival. This is not just for us to have fun and to, I don't know, talk a lot, but it is truly to help equip people to go beyond survival, to thrive as followers of Jesus. And so, Peter, I'm excited to have you here to talk about that. Peter Johnson, what is it that you do vocationally? Who are you?
So I am the Family Ministries Director here at Waymaker Church, where Waymaker Institute is housed. Kind of wearing two hats in this season, but I'm the Family Ministry Director, which means I get to oversee and lead just all family ministries here at Waymaker, everything from Way Kids, Joy Makers, Midway, Way Youth, Student Ministry, all that. But in this season too, I'm also Student Ministries Director, specifically leading the high school ministry, which
Way Youth, shout out.
Oh, so fun. You'd be amazed. Like I used to do student ministry all the time. That's like my background. And I took 1 year not being a part of the student ministry at all and just leading Way Kids. And now I'm back and I feel already like a grandfather. Like I cannot keep up because like I was in this new rhythm of like rhythm. Here you go.
There you go.
Of this like, we go to bed at like 9 or 10. Like I'm gonna go to bed 9 or 10. I don't get home until 11 on Wednesday nights. And it's new. It's new, but it's a lot of fun. And God's been doing a lot of cool stuff. So super, super excited. But that's what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Emily.
Yes.
Your wife. You guys have this whole marriage thing figured out down.
I'm waiting for y'all to talk about marriage, and just that way we can just come in and tell everyone how it's done.
Yeah.
You know?
When's your book coming out?
We've already got 2 out.
That's a great answer. Wow.
On the fly.
Yeah. So let's let me just start off this way. When you hear the idea of regular rhythms, and I kind of already set it up, what do you think of? What are literally, whether it's practical or abstract things that come to mind when you think regular rhythms of a follower of Jesus? What comes to mind?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you think of your classics, right? Like, I mean, I grew up Baptist, so and a really good church. I'm not like digging on the church in any way, shape, or form. But when I think of like the regular rhythms of the Christian, it has to look something like your quiet time,
or
Devotions.
devotions.
Okay.
Did you have devotions, Sophia?
I did.
Okay.
Yes,
did you call them devotions?
In college that was like a big thing, like devotional time.
Yeah.
You had like an actual devotional
book.
Yes, with little excerpts of scripture pulled out
Love
of
it.
context. Okay, anyways, continue, Peter. Sorry.
You threw that,
Yes.
threw that in there. I like that.
That's funny. But no, I think of those just, quiet times. Other regular rhythms of a Christian would be something like praying before meals, praying before bed, especially with families, like different things like that. So when I think my initial thought is just like, hey, what's the regular rhythms of a Christian? If you were to ask me, 3 or 4 years ago, that's what probably I would say. Just like, I guess that's kind of the regular rhythms of a Christian.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of changed.
Yeah.
Rhythms look a little bit different because rhythms aren't necessarily just like things that are like plug and play. Rhythms kind of inform a little bit of everything you do.
Yeah.
Like kind of like music without rhythm doesn't sound good. It usually has no direction that it's heading, no build up, no nothing.
Yeah.
Same with life. Like, rhythms are more important than just like, oh, it's just one little thing I do here and it stays there.
Yeah.
There's one little thing I do here and it stays there. Rhythms more just like, oh, like this is actually starting something for my day. Like, so it's not just quiet time in the morning. It's a morning rhythm that influences and informs the rest of your day. And
it's good.
So like, that's kind of where it's expanded.
a good metaphor.
Yeah.
Music without rhythm.
Yeah, that helped me. Like when in the beginning to realize the importance of like, oh, like this is a bigger piece of a grand orchestra that is your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
So
that's really good.
Yeah.
So before we jump into some of the maybe deeper, heavier stuff, I did want to ask you something. Okay.
Yep.
Can you explain why you believe it's appropriate to break up with someone because they have bad breath?
Who told you this?
I think the people have a right to. I think the people have a right to know how you could break up with someone just because they had morning coffee breath.
He's exposing
You asked a serious question first, and then you snuck this one in, and I knew you were going to ask something, and then I was like, oh, I guess we're not doing anything.
I lulled you into a sense of safety and security, and then I pulled the rug.
Yeah, no, I've told this story like only a couple times, so I only have a couple people I can really go to and be like, how dare you? Listen, when I was in 9th grade, I did not have a relationship with Jesus. No, I was in 10th grade. Still didn't have a relationship with Jesus.
So you're going to pull the before Jesus card?
That's the card you got to pull whenever you did something really like scummy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I started, a girl had moved to our school. And if she's watching this, I'm sorry. But I remember being like, oh, she's really pretty. Like, I would want to date her. And like, even in high school, like, it's still dating is kind of this weird thing where like neither of us could drive. Sure. So like, it wasn't really anything. So it was just like, we hung out at school for the most part. Yeah. And, I just noticed one day I was like, oh, her breath doesn't smell good today. And then the next day I was like, oh, her breath doesn't smell good. And I was like, I don't think I can do this. Oh. So I broke up with her, but I didn't tell her why. Like, which is bad. Yeah. I mean, I'm a 10th grader. Cut me some slack. But it was bad. But I also knew it probably wasn't the best idea to tell, a 10th grade girl.
Sure.
Like, hey, your breath is bad. Yeah. Like, but maybe it could have been the kind thing to be like, hey, your breath's bad. And in hindsight.
There's a debate that sometimes, like, kindness is telling the truth.
Exactly.
Because maybe she needed to know that, hey, it might be something you can do to help your breath.
Back then, I was just looking out for me.
Yeah.
So, no, that's fair. And I wasn't good with confrontation. So I was just like, hey, like, I just don't think this is going to work. And it was done. I did it right before my mom picked me up from school because I didn't take the bus. And so my mom pulled up and I was like, sweet, here's my window of opportunity. And I told her, I was like, hey, I don't think this is working out. Shoom, went home. So...
But at least it was face to face.
Yeah, I did do it face to face.
That's something.
Would it also be bad to say I didn't have a cell phone? So there's that. So didn't really have a choice.
Okay.
I didn't tell someone else to break up with her for me. That I guess that was the win.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But man, that was a long time ago. That was over 10 years ago.
Yeah, okay. Good. So, remember, before Jesus. So all right. Well,
we've grown.
Beyond Survival podcast sponsored by Crest.
Sponsored by Crest. I was literally about to say that. I was like, sponsored by Crest.
Yes. Awesome.
Get some Listerine strips or something.
Yes. Okay. Well, speaking of before Jesus, actually, let's talk about, specifically your relationship with Jesus before regular rhythms.
Yeah.
So describe to us how that relationship looked like before you really learned and implemented maybe spiritual disciplines and rhythms into your life.
Yeah, that's good. So I became a follower of Jesus when I was 17. And it was, so I guess, I mean, like now that's 10 years ago. And I think about it, and there's a period of time from high school being a part of a youth group, and then college, going here to Liberty, and like being a part of a Christian university, being a part of different ministries. I was part of like a ministry team there. I was always in a place where I would be surrounded by other Christians, surrounded by some form of leadership, some form of Christian mentorship, and things like that. And that's what informed my, relationship with Jesus and how I grew. It was for a solid 4 or 5 years based upon where I was and who was pouring into me. Part of what you said is like, hey, like you are a part of the people that you're surrounded by. I think that was a little bit of God's grace on me that after, having the high school experience I had, which was definitely far from Jesus, and then being with Jesus and being surrounded by people that I was able to glean from and learn more from and become more like, it helped me grow more into at least a man of better character following Jesus. But that's what I equated those rhythms to. There was really not much that I was doing like in the morning or at night, especially if I was in seasons where like Christmas break or summer break where I was alone. But when I was like with my roommates, like I had one roommate that was really big on like, all right, let's get up and let's read our Bibles. And I'm like, okay, so I was very much like a follower in that sense. And I don't regret that because, I was able to get in the Word and do those things, which built up a lot of good knowledge, good practices. But there was nothing in me that was creating a specific rhythm or a specific discipline to work on my relationship with Jesus. So before I would say I started adding rhythms, it was mainly just who was I with? Where was I working at the time? What was I a part of that influenced a lot? And I think graduating college, that's a big one. Where you start to realize how much that is true. Because I graduated college and I worked 6 months in a call center. And there's not much. I do believe that God can take anything and make it feel real holy and real spiritual. There's not much about a call center that will do that for you. You might have some experience with that.
Maybe. Yeah, for 4 years.
Yeah.
In a call center type environment.
I worked there for 3 weeks and I said, something's got to change. But I worked there for 6 months. I always thought it was good to have a job while I was looking for a better job.
Yeah.
I had to make ends meet. But that was kind of the wake up moment for me where I kind of felt this numbness, this staleness, but I wasn't surrounded by, what I had been surrounded by for many years of just, being with, people who were excited and had their own rhythms. But Jesus said I was just kind of partnering them with. And then I would say I knew that I was like, man, I need to go learn and be a part because I want to go into ministry, but I had this weird fear that I did not know what that looks like. And that's how I ended up going to the residency, Brentwood at the time. And that's where everything really started to change because Brentwood challenged the like, hey, like you have to do some stuff yourself, right? Yeah. And that kind of started that process. But before that, it was other people informed.
You obviously, were a believer, but you would say that your relationship with Jesus was, I think you described it as stale, or I don't know the exact.
Yeah, I use those. Stale and numb. When you took people out of what I was doing.
So you knew you were going to heaven, but there wasn't a vibrancy, there wasn't a fruit to that relationship, and because you had been removed from the environment and the relationships that helped kind of spark in you the somewhat of a pursuit of Jesus, right? And so you were moving that.
Yeah, and I think I was witnessing a part of the whole where like I got to experience community and the importance of community,
which is part of it,
and how that spurs growth. But I don't want to say I took community as far as it can go because there's more and more in that. But I think if as someone who is not individually going and submitting themselves before specific rhythms of like God says, hey, Peter, this is what I have for you and this is what I need you to submit to. I was only going to be dragged, I guess, by my community more than me being a part of and even just an influence in my community and just how we do things. And that's when I started feeling that I was starting to rub up against the ceiling of like, I guess my spiritual depth.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. Like, and then it became clear I was uncomfortable and that something had to change at a certain point.
Okay.
So,
What changed then?
yes. All started 2019. I was doing grad work for Waymaker Institute. I was part of the first class.
Yes.
First class.
First class.
Of Waymaker Institute.
Yep.
And it was only a couple of us that are grad students, and we had a couple extra assignments. And I was taking spiritual formation with Maria Rolfe. And shout out Maria Rolfe.
Maria Rolfe.
Yeah.
At the time of this filming, her episode just came out
Yeah.
Amazing.
and rocked my world.
Every time she speaks, I'm just like, I just drop and I'm just like,
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
listen.
So,
Yeah.
man, that's so cool. The full circle of that, like her teaching this spiritual formation class, and here you are talking
Yeah.
about like regular rhythms.
It was honestly kind of humbling to witness her episode
Yeah.
drop and knowing that I was about to do this, and I was just like, whoa, like
Yep.
I would not have picked, like it was a humbling moment where I was like, well, thank you, God, like
Yes,
that
thank
I
you,
never
God.
thought.
It's good.
Yeah.
But anyway, no, it started with that class, and we had to teach on spiritual disciplines. And for me, I had a very basic level idea of spiritual disciplines. And I've always, because of what I did at Liberty, I've always been very big on studying the Bible and like doing deep dives, inductive Bible studies, hermeneutics, things like that was more of like my understanding and gifting. So I was like, I want to teach on that. And she was like, okay, well, the grad students have to teach too. That was like the different thing. I want you to teach one, obviously, that you're comfortable with, but I want you to teach one that you hate the most, that you just don't want to do it.
Well done, Maria.
And I was just like, okay. And I looked at it and I was trying to sneak in like something that I was like, oh, I hate this. But I was dancing around silence and solitude. And then finally I was just like, all right, silence and solitude, let's do this. Cause like I'm the type of person that I jam to music all the time. Like I don't like a silent moment. So silence and solitude just didn't sound good. But I submitted myself for about 3 or 4 weeks to just practicing silence and solitude. And that was an awesome month where as I was prepping for that presentation, and I enjoyed doing that and presenting that presentation more than the study one, the Bible study one. So I was like, oh, this is really interesting. But it didn't really follow me after that because I was still in a season where I was a resident at Waymaker. I was taking grad work classes, and I was working at a restaurant at night. So I was recently engaged. So I'm busy, busy. And there was just a point where I was just like, okay, that was fun. And then I just kind of moved on with my life and then dealt with the stresses and things like that. Well, fast forward a year later, well, I guess a little bit over a year later, pandemic hit. Fall 2020. The pandemic, just a quick blurb, that was like any growth that I was doing just by my rhythms at Waymaker, like just working as a resident, was destroyed because, I mean, there were some times where I was like, during the pandemic, I was like, oh, I have a Zoom meeting at 10, I'll wake up at 9:30. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, or I have a Zoom meeting at noon, sweet, I'll just won't set an alarm, And I was finding myself waking up super late. Like I had no sense of rhythm. Like it just messed up everything. And it kind of exposed and brought me to, I think, face to face with bigger parts about who I am, which is like, I can struggle with apathy if I'm not, constantly, seeking Jesus, being motivated, like, forcing myself to get out and do work, and just becoming very, distracted, self-centered, like I just want to be comfortable, like things like that. But then we ended up going back to work, like into the offices, and I tried to shift back into that, and it was really, really hard. And at that time, I was just the part-time midway director leading middle schoolers, and I wasn't even really doing that well, And like, I look back on that, and I'm like, that's a softball, like that's the only thing you're focused on, and you're not doing that well. And so in the fall, me and Emily are about to go on vacation in October. And I had just had a hard conversation with my boss, Zach, at the time, who was just like, you are stagnant and you're not doing anything. What's going on? And I was just realizing that I was like, I have no sense of drive. I have no sense of rhythm. I have no sense of like, I'm just kind of just reacting to life. And I just looked at Emily and I was like, hey, I want to do something while we're on vacation. We were just gone for a week. And I just said, I don't know what this looks like, but let's in the morning, like, let's not sleep in, wake up at 10. Let's like wake up at, like, for us early, like, let's wake up at 8:30.
Oh, 8:30.
You know, let's do that. And let's just do something spiritual is what I said. Let's read our Bible. Let's pray. Let's do those things. So we wake up and I tried to read my Bible and I was like, and it felt forced. I was like, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel good. So I actually settled for, I was like, you know what? The very least, let me say that I at least did this right today. And I'm gonna put on a sermon. So pulled out the YouTube app on the Airbnb we were staying at on the TV, and the sermon that had come out like a couple weeks before from Craig Rochelle's church was Habits.
Habits.
And that rocked our world. We were watching that, and I was like, that is what I need. Like, that is so good. And to fast forward just a little bit, after that vacation, I went through that whole series and I downloaded a devotional specifically on habits, which led to another devotional on spiritual disciplines, which led to like this idea of creating rules of life, like different things like that. And I was just like, this sounds like my next step. And it was just kind of clear because it was the first time I was excited about something spiritual in a while.
Yeah.
And growing in my relationship with God. And God was just, during that 1 week, I felt life again, and I felt like this desire and this drive. So I left that vacation. For me specifically, I'm going to go after 4 things as habits. Those 4 things were I want to practice silence and solitude and make that my spiritual discipline that I'm focusing on in this specific season, because I knew that month, a year before, was that precursor of like, God's like, hey, I got something for you here. But then other things such as I want to have a good rhythm of my day. And I realized that in order for me to do silence and solitude and have a good rhythm of my day, I had to wake up earlier. So I made the commitment to wake up at 6 every single day to do whatever is necessary. I was unhappy with where I was in my health at that time because at that time we had just moved in the building and there's sodas all over the place in this building. And I remembered the week prior, I was like, I had 3 Coca-Colas in one day.
Yikes.
And I was like, we need to stop that. And I was like, maybe 1 a day or whatever it be. And then I just felt depressed. I was like, what if you just got rid of soda? Right? That one actually sounds like the hardest, but also not the hardest at the same time. And then the 4th one was work out every day. And the cool thing was, and I love that, is that for months and months, 3 of those were successful.
Yeah.
The workout one was one that I am still journeying through to this day. But that's where it started.
Yeah.
And then from there, like, God did a lot of cool things in me and just my marriage and just work, all of that.
Yeah.
So
no, that's good. Silence and solitude, when you talk about that particular rhythm or discipline, you know, honestly, it's not a foreign concept to even our world and culture. I mean, the Apple Watch now has a meditation component to it where it says, "Hey, breathe," you know, or you know, be. And so it's not necessarily something that only followers of Jesus talk about, or no. So when you think about silence and solitude, what aspect of a relationship with Jesus does that actually, how's that correlated to a relationship with Jesus, a thriving one? Yeah.
And I think like silence and solitude can easily be paired with, but also confused with like meditation. Yeah. But I think the specific thing about silence and solitude that really struck out to me is that I was able to be in a moment where you're forced, at least in the way that I learned, you're forced to not intake anything else. Yeah. Music, words, anything like that. You are alone, no distraction. But you're also forced to empty your mind, to not focus on things that you want to get out of your relationship with Jesus, or focus on things that you want to, you know, see happen in that moment.
Or produce.
Yeah.
Like to produce or work towards
exactly.
something.
Like, I want to become more like this, and this is going to help me get there. Yeah. Or even worse, like you'll sit there and be like, just like a prayer when you pray, and sometimes you like, I'm going to start praying right now, and then you start thinking about your day instead of praying. Silence and solitude can go into that where you get lost in your mind and you're actually not really partaking in it. But that's, as you start to practice, that's actually normal. Usually the first 3-5 minutes, you're actually kind of letting those thoughts kind of run a little bit. So that way you can slowly empty your mind, because then the silence really starts to hit. But then there becomes this moment where it is silent. Your mind is kind of, racing, is empty. And then you are finally hearing your inner like self and things that are wrong, things that are not of God, start to really say like, oh, we have nowhere to hide. Like there's no distraction that is muting me right now. And those things come to light. And I genuinely believe that silence and solitude at the very beginning is a lot like heart surgery for the soul, like where Jesus is like, okay, I'm glad you have a good prayer life. I'm glad you have this. I'm glad that I know everything that you desire and that you want and that you want to see happen. But now let me show you that I want to do something, but silence and solitude helps expose some things about your life that you're just not paying attention to, that God really wants to stir up. It's usually, at least in my life, where a lot of my anxiety would come from, a lot of my insecurity would come from, and taking just a moment to be silent and just let my soul cry out in a sense to Jesus and say like, this is what's broken, and God exposing that. And it's cool because you can leave silence and solitude, one, thankful. It's scary at first, but thankful that God exposed some things, because now you have something to work for and work on, which is cool. So
I wonder if David, when he talked about in the psalm, like, search me, know my heart, like anything wicked in there, I wonder if he's talking about silence and solitude.
Maybe. When I think about that,
literally saying, hey, I'm going to sit here. God, would you start to bring things to the surface? So, Sophia, how do you feel about silence and solitude?
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what in your words, describe how it is a component of your relationship with Jesus? What does it do for you?
For me, it is a huge tool / weapon against my anxiety.
Wow.
I struggle with anxiety very badly. It's, been a battle throughout my life, and silence and solitude over this last year has been a huge component. Like, I have seen such a shift, like a reduction of how much anxiety and panic that I have through silence and solitude. It was challenging at first. I'm very similar. I love music. I love having noise in the background, getting quiet. I used to think that silence is what caused my anxiety. Like, being quiet is what would cause my anxiety. Like, I need something on, I need noise, or else I'm going to feel anxious. It wasn't until I started practicing it that I actually realized it was the noise that was making me more anxious, because I didn't have time to process and think. So I do it pretty much every day now. I've gotten this habit of having nothing on while I'm prepping dinner. Usually dinner takes like an hour and a half in my house, because I'm cooking for 2 boys. And my 1-year-old eats just as much as his 28-year-old dad.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
insane.
It's
impressive.
I'm really scared for when he's like a teenager. But I use that time, no music, no TV, no podcast, nothing. And oh my goodness, it is just, it's like just a wave of refreshment. Everything, like, it's like what you're describing. Like, the first 5 minutes, it's usually chaotic. In your head, you're thinking about all these different things. And then eventually just a stillness comes. And I think it's been important in directing me in my identity as well, because I do feel like, as followers of Jesus, we can, and even if you're not a follower of Jesus, you can develop a sense of, I always need to be producing, I always need to be working, even in my relationship with Jesus. What can I gain out of this study? What can I gain out of, this song or this sermon? But silence and solitude, it's nothing. You're not working. You're not trying to gain anything. You're not trying to really even learn or have a goal. It's literally to shut everything else down. And it's been very transformational. So yeah, I love it.
You, Peter, would later encounter a difficult season where probably you felt like, survival became a very real
day-to-day
part of your life.
Every day was different.
Yeah. So talk to us about that. And then once you describe that, talk to us about how these regular rhythms played a part in that difficult season.
Yeah. In 2020, fall 2020, when I started these rhythms, I had this picture in my mind of just like, this is going to help me not only grow in the true sense, like I wanted to grow my relationship with Jesus. That was the center. But then there was also like, I work at a church, right? Like I was like, this is not only going to do this, but this is going to make me tools to be a better leader, to be a better, shepherd, like, cause I'm going to grow in my relationship in the heart, and those things happened, and it was really good. But I do think, the timing of when God, was pressing on me, like now's the time to really go after these rhythms, and these disciplines ultimately, was I think also to prepare me, specifically for what that spring of 2021 was going to cause. So, my father in 2021, right at the very beginning, got COVID, a really bad case, and he actually ended up on a ventilator, for 2 months, where almost every day something new would happen, right? There'd be one day where it's like, which it's amazing, like the amount of complications that came with COVID. Like one day there would be, hey, we have to do surgery on his legs because he might lose his legs. And it's like, this is a lung disease. Like what's going on? But apparently COVID was creating blood clots, and that was a complication that was pretty common. So they had to do this 6-hour like invasive surgery. But instead of, sitting on my phone or like numbing myself by watching TV or whatever it be, and because this was early on, like I felt this need to just be in my room, be alone, silent. And I would either just be silent, I would weep, I would pray, I would just pace sometimes and just talk with God. And it was because of these disciplines that I built. And
but just to say, you talked about the idea of numbing or distracting, which, as Americans, we are experts at that.
Yeah.
Yep.
When anything difficult or uncomfortable comes our way, there's a natural default to, if I can get enough noise in my life to distract, to numb, to entertain me, so I don't have to actually face what is before me.
Right.
That is kind of the whole point of even just specifically Silence and Solitude, where you haven't actually come to face with what's happening, not just externally, but also internally. And so it's really cool that, like you said, the timing of that and how you were probably going to other things maybe than you would have in previous seasons.
Yep. My initial instinct was that won't work. This might.
Yeah.
And very well could.
Yeah.
And like, I remember, his surgery was a success that day, and it was like, awesome, we got over this thing. But it was weird because like, it was the first time I'd ever experienced like, oh, sweet, praise God. But then the next day something bad would happen, or the next day something happened. And then a week would be good, and then a week would be awful. And it was a true roller coaster. Like there would be immense hope in one day, and then literally the following week, the whole family is gathered, and a doctor is saying like, a doctor and a second opinion doctor saying like, we would be comfortable if you were to let him, like we'd take him off the ventilator and let him pass.
Wow.
Like, and it's just
so that
like,
was your reality.
That
you
was
had to
my
come
reality.
face to face with.
Meanwhile, my mother, because my hometown's about 45 minutes away from here. My mother or my dad ended up being put in the hospital here in Lynchburg. So by God's grace and design in the situation as well, like my mom was able to stay with me and Emily, and for about 2 months, and a little bit longer actually. But it was hard because like I had to not only process what was happening with my dad, who I'm really close with, but in our guest room, I would wake up in the morning, 6 o'clock, right? And then I would start like getting my coffee ready, and I would just be hearing my mom awake and weeping, And it's just like, how do I do this, right?
Yeah.
But here's the two things I would say that I walked away with in that season when I look back on it. Those rhythms and those disciplines not only have built in me up until that moment to help face hardship, but it also allowed me to pastor in that to my own mother, to people in the hospital, to my brother, to my wife, and then sometimes, to myself, right? Just being able to submit to that and know that like, hey, like at the end of the day, like, this show is going to help me. This thing is going to help me like Jesus will. But the other thing that I walked away with is that, in those 2 months, was I successful in sustaining the rhythms that I had built? No. I remember the week that we were told that he was going to pass. I had kind of given up. Because at that point we were about a month and a half battle through it, and literally 2 months prior, I'm pacing for 6 hours and doing some form of prayer, silence, meditation, things like that, begging God to move into surgery. But in that moment, when we get told that, I just didn't have the strength anymore. And I wish I could say, like, in the week where it mattered most, that I was praying the hardest or whatever it be. I was praying for like maybe 2 minutes, and then I was just tired because I felt like I was repeating the same prayer. And then I watched a season of New Girl. You know, I went back to because you know, I don't know. I was in this weird thing. I didn't listen to much music during that season because I didn't want anything to connect. You know what I mean? Like there's that one band when you have a breakup that you can't listen to anymore. You know?
Wow.
Like I was just like, I can't. And for some reason, New Girl didn't make me mad, right? Or I was just like, you know what? Sure, I'll put on New Girl. I remember almost feeling guilty that when my dad started to pull through, the miracle story is, for people that know the story, is that he had a miraculous turnaround, and we had a bunch of people continually praying on his behalf, and that was the other thing. I knew that where I didn't have the strength, I would just continue to say that, hey, be praying, to other people, because
community
came back around. I needed that, and but I mean, God pulled through, and I had this weird guilt moment where I was like, the moment that I wish I could have stayed in rhythm most, right, was the moment that I failed. But I think the thing I love is that, yes, I failed in my rhythm. I failed in going to what I believe would have been the better option. But God was still so gracious and so good. And I would say the following year was just kind of like, there was this weird 2-month period where my dad felt like he was dead. Like it felt like to me that he was dead. But then he was suddenly alive. You know, because he was asleep for over 2 months. And it was I had this weird trauma of like dealing with like, hey, my dad survived, but it was like a really hard season. And, you know, just trying to figure out, because a lot of stuff happened in my family at the same time, like just, you know, with my mom and my brother, where we're just trying to figure it out, and, you know, when emotions are high. All that to say, like, I think about a year later, I had realized that I had kind of stepped foot into two worlds where I was still trying to hold on to some rhythms, but I found myself being like, in the mornings I was holding on to rhythm, but in the evenings I was back in distraction. So in the mornings I would like have silence and solitude. I would do those things and I'd be like, sweet, check. But at night I would just give up, and I'd be like, hey, we're just gonna watch a bunch of TV, or we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, and we're gonna be on our phones on the couch the whole time, me and Emily. And like, that's just kind of the season where I think now, I would say beginning of 2022, that's the year we're in.
Yes, that is the
It's been a crazy past couple of years, guys. But where Emily and I have kind of been like, whoa, like we've kind of lost track of some of our rhythms. I think for me, like, and this is something that I've been working on in this season, like I've been too glued to my phone. That came back in during this whole situation. And that was a rhythm that I was trying to like be, you know, I didn't want to be digitally distracted, but I've gotten back into digital distraction. So the other thing is that when hard seasons come, like, yes, those rhythms help you, but it can be really hard, and it can remind you that you do fail and that you will fall short, just like you will in the beginning, you know, when you first start those things. But ultimately, like, there will be a point, at least in my experience, where you are reminded yet again that there's nothing in this world that can compare to the things that we do to grow in our relationship with Jesus. So even after going through so far in my adult life, the hardest thing that I've had to deal with, I now am able to still say like, yep, and I got distracted for a season, and I kind of lost some rhythms for a season, but I am eager to get back in. Why? Because I know it's that much more beneficial. So
good.
That is so good. I feel like it's like in all of that, there is more of an emphasis on the grace of God and the power of his presence, because I can relate a lot to your journey. Right, you know, when my husband's mom passed, we like had established such good rhythms, but after that happened, like for a week, I binged Gilmore Girls. Like that was my show. I wasn't listening to music. It was the same thing. Like I love music. And in that season, I couldn't listen to anything because I didn't want music to be attached to that. So I can relate to that. And I was like, I just need something that takes me out of this world
Yep.
and that isn't heavy, that's lighthearted, funny,
Yes.
that kind of thing. Gilmore Girls,
New
great
Girl.
show. Yes,
There
New
you go.
Girl's great. And then it was in that season, I was like, forget my rhythms. Like, I feel like God has just failed my family. So I'm, going to ignore that and numb myself. And then coming out of that, you can feel a sense of guilt of like, man, like, why couldn't I, stay with that? And now I'm working to gain this back. But it's like in the crushing moments, rhythms can help us, but ultimately, like when you are in the pit, it's not necessarily those rhythms that are necessarily going to pull you out as much as it is God's grace and power and favor and love and kindness. So I feel like people just need to know that rhythms are so important, but to not feel defeated if you're wrestling or struggling with those, because ultimately it's his grace that covers all of that. So
and it's because when we're talking about regular rhythms, we're not talking about our like salvation,
right,
and what Jesus has done for us. What we are talking about is we're being shaped and formed into something. And God's intent is that we're shaped and formed into the likeness of Jesus so that this world is able to see God and his character and his fullness. And so, but there's those seasons where it's like, man, thankful for God's grace, and that hopefully, because I think what happens is that maybe you experience a dark pit valley season, but then that becomes the normal rhythm. That thing that you had gone to now is the normal and will produce in you something that you never intended. And it's like, well, you didn't get to choose that your father almost died.
Right.
And not only almost died, but went through a long season of ups and downs, like you said, hope and then despair and then hope and then despair. So you didn't get to choose that, right? But there comes a certain point where you say, well, I don't want to be formed into whatever will be formed if I continue in these practices or rhythms or distractions. So I want to introduce back into it. And the beautiful thing is God's grace allows us to do that. He's like, well, awesome. I've been here the whole time, been waiting. Like it's, I literally, the prodigal son, the father, he's like, I've just been waiting. And let's get back on and let's go.
Oh yeah. I remember feeling in the very beginning of starting to just submit myself again to the rhythms. And then also knowing that like, it's not necessarily going back to the same rhythms. Sometimes you have to build new rhythms or your seasons inform a different rhythm. And I remember having this moment where I was like, I felt like I was like, oh man, I'm about to go before a God who's going to judge that I made a decision other than him. And he's going to, but that wasn't true at all. Right. And once I realized that, it was just like, I mean, like, it's no secret to him and it's no secret to me that I was like, yeah, like what was beneficial for the things I was distracting myself with? None. But Jesus still loves me. And like, he's just so glad that I'm back in his presence. And, like, I don't know, especially in today's Christian church culture, we can be so hard on ourselves when we fall out, even for a little bit. But it's really like, it's not like we're doing a sprint and coming in second. Like it's a marathon. There's going to be seasons where we're just struggling and be like, how am I going to get up this hill? Or this cramp in my leg will not go away. But at the end of the day, like there's going to be seasons where, you feel that energy to run again and Jesus is still there. Right. So
it is God's grace that allows us to get back up. Period. And then to fall down and then get back up.
And that is rhythms. That is any habit. That is any discipline. If you come in thinking 100%, I'm going to crush this thing, master it, good luck. Because like you're going after a lifelong journey of not even coming close, probably.
So this is a little abstract and like maybe I don't know, maybe you haven't thought about this, but so before this happened to your dad, which by the way, saw your dad this past Sunday walking around looking good.
Which
come on,
we were told that even if he had survived, that he was probably never going to walk again.
Wow.
And he was probably going to always have oxygen with him.
Yeah.
And he's out here walking,
Man.
like toes amputated, walking. right? And like just it's an absolute miracle.
Yes. Wow.
It was awesome. That was a full circle moment for me. So,
yes, I saw him in the lobby and just thought about the season, thought about the fact that we were getting ready to record this episode, and just God's master storytelling in all of that, and seeing your mom and just seeing the joy. So it was really cool. Amazing. Sophia, any like hearing a story and his experience, any final question that you would ask Peter?
I do have a final question. I don't know if it's going to take us on a whole nother
Go
loop,
for it.
but I'm just going to throw it in there. And I think, honestly, this question could be for both of you guys in a way. How have rhythms allowed you both, as people who work for a church, to not have your identity wrapped in what you do, your identity as a follower of Jesus, to be wrapped in what you do? Because it can be really difficult when you work for a church, when that is your vocation, your calling, but you're also following Jesus in your own time. How have rhythms helped you not get trapped in what I do is who I am, and if this was taken from me, then who would I be? Does that question make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's funny is like, I mean, Brett, you and I have very similar personalities, similar marriages. That was fun. Marriage counseling. Like we realized that we are the same Enneagram as our wives.
Yes.
And like, it's just very interesting. So like, I'm excited. I love that I'm giving my answer first, and then I'm gonna throw you a softball of like where you're going to go. Okay. Because like, I do like if I ever have a question about how I'm growing in a season, usually you'd be the first person I go to. Cause I was like, you've probably dealt with this. What do you think? No, I would say for me, cause if I were to measure like in life, like what has rhythms helped me grow in? And no, this was not the purpose of growing in rhythms, but like I went from only being able to feel like my capacity was part-time work to now I'm leading an entire ministry here at Waymaker, not by my own merit, but how God has been working in me. And I'm very thankful, and it's super humbling. And I constantly always feel like I'm like, am I ready for this? And I'm like, okay, well, God, you better keep equipping me, right? Because it's a heavy season. But the reality is that now I went through a season in the fall actually where I was wrestling really hard with it, but growing from the fall, being able to in rhythms just know that like my life and what God wants for me and my family is more important to what I'm doing in life than what I do here at Waymaker is vastly more important. But also realizing that there's a part of what I'm doing here as Waymaker that can help unite the whole, if that makes sense. There was a season where I had an unhealthy rhythm, I would say, of keeping my personal life. I felt like I had to protect Emily from my work at the church, and I had to protect the church from like, I don't know where I was going with that.
Just from like your personal life.
Yeah. I would just I would have to keep them separate to keep them both healthy.
Okay.
And I learned, I was like, it bred in some really bad habits in my life of like people pleasing and, 3's natural deception. And it's just like, oh, these things were starting to creep up. And, I got confronted on it, and I was like, praise God. It was a hard moment, but a good moment. But I learned to create a new rhythm of like, just, having Emily be really involved and, making sure she's envisioned and knowing of what we're going after. And because I was creating my own problem thinking I was protecting one.
Wow.
But all that to say, creating new rhythms in my life, but also creating a specific rhythm that I have with Jesus to form my identity separate from what I'm doing at Waymaker has allowed me to lead here knowing that I can take risks, and while something might fail, while it may not work out right, it's okay. I have the opportunity to try again, hopefully, right? And even if I don't, like, that's okay. I'm not defined by it. I don't view like my work is the family ministries here at Waymaker. Like I am what makes that happen. Cause that'd be bad. God is what makes that happen. But what I feel is that God has given me the responsibility to steward it, not to be it.
Wow.
Not to, like make that my DNA of my life. He's given me the responsibility to steward it.
Wow.
but that influences and informs how my family functions at the same time. Because if we're called to steward it, then that means things change and rhythms are built.
Sure.
So I'm still honestly in the season of learning what that looks like.
Yeah.
I think God's been really good and really gracious.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, yeah, I would say like he's given me an identity that is of his more than what I do here, and that's helped me a lot.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
That's really good.
That is
That was
so
really
good.
well
Not
articulated. First of all, I could not have articulated that as early in my ministry journey as you just did. So well done.
So good.
So I'll say it this way. I've been in full-time vocational church ministry for a decade now, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And the reality is this. Rhythms have refocused my affection, period. So there were, for more years than not, I feel like my affection or my affinity or my love and desire was more geared towards the work of the ministry and what I could do and produce because I was good at it. And what happened is when I began to introduce these regular rhythms, it stirred up in me an affection for Jesus, like truly a love and a desire for him. And I go back to, and I think I said it in the very first episode with Tanner. It was like I had tasted and seen that the Lord is good and like who he is. And so what began to happen, and it's funny because people from the outside would say, there was a shift in you, something changed in you about 4 years ago, right? That's because these things started to develop in me. So what happened is my affection and my desires were geared towards Jesus, and then what I did in ministry was an overflow of that. Which changed how I did everything. Yeah. Like literally everything. And so and so I guess that's how it's affected my identity is because it's stirred up that desire and affection for Jesus and has informed how I do everything else. And it's I don't want to go back. Like and there's seasons where I'm tempted to, right? Because it's what's easy or what I'm most comfortable in my flesh, but you know, there's also parts of me that's like I have tasted and seen. I don't want to go back to the other way. So
Wow.
Yeah.
So your affections point you in the direction that you're going to go, and God has given you something to steward, but not to become.
Yes.
Like
well said.
Those two things.
Yeah.
Huge, guys.
And and the thing is, this translates to no matter what your vocation is.
No matter what you do.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
absolutely.
and because you've even talked about that, like just your own identity as a wife, as a mom, as a small business owner. And it's those things are really good. Yeah. But when they become the source of your identity, things get shaky, something can change, and now you're like, my world's crumbling down, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I just envision a world that through what we do here, right, that like just the Institute and things like that, because the amount of, in this season specifically, I have the opportunity and the privilege to lead multiple Institute students in the practicum. And I had a couple that, you know, had next steps of like, I want to do summer internship or I want to do this. And their world was just wrapped around. And like now in my perspective, I'm like, it's just 3 months, not even, right? Yeah. And it's just like, it's okay if you don't get it or if you do or like whatever it be, but like just this weight of a decision. And it's just so clear that like we define, they're just in the stage of defining themselves. And
well said.
I feel myself coming out of a stage like that where I'm still wrestling with pieces of it. And, but I have this beautiful picture of like, imagine if people in their early 20s got really just like finally we were able to embrace like a new generation who just was ready to embrace like, hey, like I'm more concerned about my relationship with Jesus and how I'm growing and the rhythms I'm putting there before I even think about what I'm going to do because ultimately I don't want to be a person because they'll find themselves like, I don't want to be a person that just does and then becomes that and then gets strung out and burned out. And
well said.
Yeah. So yeah, there's hope.
Okay, so
Yeah.
final
So
question,
good.
real quick. Talk to the man and the woman in their 20s, maybe like a young professional, single young professional, or newly married.
Yep.
That love Jesus. They know they're going to heaven one day, and they know that a major missing component is developing regular rhythms that helps to form them into the likeness of Jesus.
Yes.
Where do they begin?
Yes. That is a very, very. I was gonna say something so like annoying because you would hate, but like just do it. and
Just do it.
That is
Nike on.
there was I got my kill shots on. We're good.
Okay.
No, I will say that is a part of what happened with me where I just had to had to take a moment and just be like, hey, don't think about how much I'm going to screw it up.
Yeah.
Or how much I'm going to not do it right the first time. I just need to do it.
Just do it.
And when I mess it up, I just need to keep going. That's one thing. But where do you start ultimately?
Yeah.
I think first you got to take a little bit of inventory in your life.
Okay.
You got to take a moment where you're like, what's going on right now? What do I not like right now? What's wrong?
Wow. Yeah.
What's broken? And you probably won't be able to fully articulate it. I wasn't able to fully articulate it, but ultimately, I would recommend you need to figure out, okay, what's wrong? And that could be as simple as like, man, like I would challenge open your screen time. That may be a good first place to start. Open your screen time and see how much time you're spending on your phone or whatever it be, or whatever else it might be. Like maybe I'm in an unhealthy eating habit or unhealthy this, unhealthy that. Look into it, see what's wrong, kind of figure out some things to fix, and then submit yourself to something that's going to challenge you. So for me, if I was like, hey, I'm going to go into a discipline, me saying like, well, I'm going to study the Bible. It's like, well, great. I've been doing that for about, at that point, like 7 years of my life. Probably would have not been that challenging.
Sure.
Not saying that the Word of God is challenging, but I probably would have found myself in a comfortable, prideful season of like, oh, I know what this passage means.
Yes.
I would say find the discipline that sounds the scariest or the most unlikable and just do it. Just submit yourself to it. I did that with Silence and Solitude and it changed everything because it brings you to another, I think it puts you face to face with another characteristic or attribute of Jesus and your relationship with him that you have not experienced yet. And then when you experience it, it almost reignites this relationship that you have with Jesus because it's like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize that you could communicate to me in this way or you could do that to me in this way.
Wow.
So and that and the spiritual disciplines, but I think it's just important. I would say for anyone that doesn't have, that's my age, if you're like 27, 28, my wife's 25, like if you are not in a place where you have rhythms, I would have to say that your next step is to build those.
Okay.
Like you've probably reached your cap and you don't know it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And if you submit yourself to a rhythm, if you submit yourself to some form of spiritual discipline, I think the first thing that I can encourage you with is that God will probably grow your capacity.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking work, I'm talking in life.
Just life. Yeah.
And but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah. That's so
Shia
good.
LaBeouf, just do it.
Just
That's
nice.
a callback.
That is a callback.
That's not even cool. That was
No.
cool like years ago.
Nope.
but
Going back.
Yeah.
That's what you gotta do.
So, awesome. Take inventory of your life. Maybe highlight or pinpoint a rhythm that is producing something that probably you don't love about yourself.
Yep.
See how you can maybe limit or even cut that out completely, and then introduce one thing, one spiritual rhythm that maybe is uncomfortable or foreign to you, and just start small and begin to work in it. And what I have found is that one rhythm in a healthy way usually leads to another
rhythm. Another rhythm. And another
well,
rhythm,
which and it works vice versa. Like, so if I am eating or if I'm working out, I tend to want to eat healthier. Like at least have the desire. I'm not saying that it always fleshes out
Sometimes
that way.
it motivates me to eat worse.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, well, I'm gonna work out tomorrow.
Yeah,
so.
but it is interesting that, and Craig Rochelle actually talks about this, that one discipline can lead to the next, that can lead to the next. And so if you start with just one thing, cultivate that, and then it usually can lead to something else.
Yep.
And probably Silence and Solitude might lead to the practice of prayer, but maybe a prayer that looks different than just praying for your meal, right?
Yeah.
Or it may lead to Sabbath, right? Where now there's a clear worshipful presence and peace that you experience because of this small silence and solitude. So it's like they lead to other things.
Yep.
So,
And I would say ultimately just kind of like my last pin in it, I would say, is the goal is not to build rhythm so that way you can be a better person or a better worker.
Okay.
And it's not also meant to be a thing so you can be less, whatever the problem it is, like less anxious, less, I don't know, less sinful, less whatever it be, whatever it is, right? The goal is not to be less like the world. The goal is to be more like Jesus. Because if you're just trying to be less like whatever it is before, you're just becoming empty.
Yeah.
The goal is to be more like Jesus.
Love
and
that.
I think that's the ultimate heart behind it.
Wow. So good.
Yeah.
Drop
awesome.
the mic.
Yeah. It's levitating.
It's-
It's connected to something I wish I could.
Here, I'll hand you mine.
But
you can drop it.
Bam.
So, Peter, thanks so much.
Thank you. This was awesome.
Thanks for taking just carving time out of your day to join us, and I pray that people are encouraged and challenged by your story of both success and the story of not being proud of where you went to, but also, man, praise God that your father is alive and doing well, and then just recognizing God's grace all over his story and your story. So thanks for just being with us and sharing that.
Thank you. You guys are awesome.